there, storytellers and story lovers. Welcome to West of the Page with Roan Weatherford Publishing. This is the place where authors open up, ideas unfold, and the indie spirit writes its own story.
I'm Lindsay Flanagan, author, editor, and publisher.
I'm Stacey Gonzalez, the social media manager.
I'm Janae Thornton, executive editor.
I'm Alan Smith, director of sales and marketing.
And I'm Sabina Berlin, author, editor, and publisher.
All right, so today we're talking to Jonathan Maberry, a New York Times bestselling author, 5-time Bram Stoker Award winner, and acclaimed comic book writer. His novels include the Joe Ledger thrillers, the Rotten Ruin series, the Dead of Night series, The Wolfman, The X-File, Origins, Devil's Advocate, Mars One, and many, many, many more. Several of his projects are in development for film and television. But we at Roan Weatherford Publishing are very lucky because we have Bad Times in the Bob, which is a Joe Ledger adventure being featured in the upcoming anthology Hard Country, edited by Revis Wortham and published by us. Welcome to West of the Page, Jonathan.
I'm delighted to be here.
We're so glad to have you. We were just talking off screen about how we actually saw you in person at Superstars, but didn't get a chance or maybe didn't dare come and talk with you.
Yeah, you guys should always come out and hang because that's what Superstars is all about. And also, I just love hanging. So
it's a great conference. We are definitely doing it next year, and we'll come in and come say hi. But let's talk about your story. So tell us about Bad Times in the Bob.
So it's a Joe Ledger short story, which is an important thing because Joe Ledger is my main character. He's the guy that I return to over and over again for different types of stories. You know, the new Joe Ledger novel, in fact, is coming out a week from today on March 10th, and it's the 15th in the series. And I'm writing the 16th, and I have the next sold and so on. And the series is in development for TV by the director John Wick. So we're having a lot of fun with the character, but he's a character I can take and put into any kind of a story. Usually it's weird science and so on, but for Hard Country, they wanted, you guys wanted just a Joe Ledger modern Western. And that hit the sweet spot for me for a couple of reasons. One, I love Westerns and I love modern Westerns. In fact, a couple of friends of mine are in a very popular modern Western right now called Dark Winds, based on the Tony Hillerman novels. Zan McLaren, Kiwa Gordon, and Jennifer Matten are all friends, and that show is just blowing up. Longmire is another contemporary Western I love so much. In fact, I just hung out with Craig at BoucherCon in September, and he's a cool cat. But in my story, I just wanted to take all the science fiction out, all the weird stuff out, and just leave a guy who is the type of person, if I drop him into any adventure, he will figure something out. For those who don't know the Joe Ledger character, real brief background on him. He's a former Army Ranger who turned Baltimore cop, who then was hired into a group, kind of a covert special ops group that goes after terrorists who usually have weird science weapons, but they also work with human trafficking and arms sales and a bunch of other things. So the character gets to play in a lot of different arenas in terms of fighting, criminality and badness out there. And the character, Joe, is also, I think the clinical description for his trauma is, batshit crazy. I think it's somewhere in that zone. He had a lot of childhood trauma that splintered his personality. He got involved in martial arts and then the military and so on for the structure of it. And it helped him kind of narrow down his 3 inner personalities so that they're useful. He actually can work with his inner personality. And that is a real world phenomenon. Some people who have dissociative disorders of different kinds and manifest different personalities can work with them, can actually have like a committee, a steering committee inside their head. And Joe does that. He does it really well. He also has a combat dog named Ghost, who is, the dog gets about 100 fan letters a month. Now, I'm not sure what kind of response people are expecting from a fictional dog, but I'm actually thinking of getting a German Shepherd paw print rubber stamp so I can just, send back. But the story, I love the location for one thing. The Bob Marshall Wilderness is absolutely gorgeous. It's in Montana. I've hiked there. I've ridden horses in the area a long time ago. it is one of those places where you can step off the road and be lost in 5 minutes and be like so lost, God can't find you lost. I mean, that kind of lost. And it's a great place to go if you really want to just hear your own thoughts without noise. You can go there. And so putting Joe, somebody who has a troubled mind, in a place like that, it's you would think it's a setup for a relaxing time. But of course, I don't allow Joe to have that much relaxation. So he runs afoul. I'm not going to go want to do any spoilers about what kind of bad guys, but he goes up against some bad guys, and there is a lot of violent disagreements between him and them. And so it's a Western, it's set in Montana. It's also an action story. It is an isolation story, and it's a survival story, all kind of wrapped into one. And I had so much fun writing it. My assistant, who reads all my short stories and does edits on them, even told me that she could tell I was having fun with it, because when you have fun, even if the material's dark, it kind of shows through in the writing. And I had a blast with it.
Well, I know our readers are very excited that Joe Ledger is showing up in this anthology. What does it mean to you to have this story appear in this anthology that will benefit the U.S. Marshals?
Well, the U.S. Marshals have always been doing a lot of good out there. They're kind of unsung heroes. They don't, they're not the kind who go after, criminals in the ordinary way that we think of law enforcement. So their work is dangerous. It's witness protection, and it's a bunch of other types of jobs. They don't get a lot of praise. They're often not in uniform anyway, because they want to keep things on the down low. But they have to be extremely dedicated, extremely focused, and extremely good at their jobs without letting their ego kind of demand praise. It takes a certain type of person to do that. And I've known a few marshals over the years, and the word stalwart, it sounds corny, except when it's applied to the right kind of person. And the marshals I've known are stalwart. They have that kind of integrity and balance and inner awareness that keeps them from escalating a situation, keeps them in control of the situation, and they're not looking to be the star of the moment. If a marshal has entered the scene, usually like the adults entered the room, and something useful and calm is probably going to happen. Very rarely do you hear of marshals pulling guns and so on, and it's a different type of law enforcement mindset. And a story like this, if it could bring attention to that area of law enforcement, to that area of people who are trained to do a difficult job, and do it not only with skill, but even a degree of grace, I think that's a great thing. And these books benefit that group. It celebrates them as people, especially when other branches of law enforcement are currently involved in things that there's a lot of political unrest about, a lot of pushback about. But the Marshal Service keeps doing its job. They're not looking for a headline. They're looking to get their job done right. And I can't help but admire that. A couple of the marshals I met actually because of Joe Ledger. A lot of law enforcement guys and a lot of special ops guys come to my book signings because the Joe Ledger character is former law enforcement who's now special ops. And I do a lot of research with, spec ops and so on. And every once in a while, somebody will show up, and you can tell they're law enforcement as soon as they enter the room. The marshals almost always fool me, though, because usually I think it's a college teacher or maybe a basketball coach or it's something. You don't expect this guy to be law enforcement because he's not out there, pushing this macho image. He's just being himself. And when you meet one, him and herself, when you meet one, you realize that here's somebody who is actually so calm at their job, so focused on doing it well, that it actually calms a room down. And it's such a fun thing. I love these guys, and a couple of the ones I've met are former special ops. So they like the Joe Ledger character, and I can't wait for them to see Joe Ledger in an anthology that's benefiting them. It's actually really cool.
Love that. I was just responding. Sorry, I have to keep myself on mute because I have the dog here, not a German Shepherd, but husky that's wanting to, part German Shepherd, that's wanting to be part of this interview.
Yeah, I grew up with Shepherds. I love Shepherds, but my current dog, Rosie, is a 14-pound little love bug who just, you know, she's almost 15 years old. She's getting older, so she's sleeping. She sleeps in a little bed under the desk, under a table next to my writing desk. And I love my dog more than I like most people. Make no apologies for that statement.
Well, all three of mine are in their crates right now so that they
Well,
won't.
dog people.
Yeah, yeah. We have a husky and then we think she's part shepherd, and then we have a little healer, and all three of them like to be helpful. But
Oh, I love healers too. Funny, I ran into, it's a little slightly off topic, but I was at a school in Umatilla, you know, up north, and the guy who actually was running the detention had a blue healer, and he would let kids take the dog for a walk, and he could, you know, watch. But there's such a, it's funny, they're a very calming influence as well. So if you're in detention for something that, you know, you went out of character with, you get to go walk this calm, beautiful dog, you tend to come back with your marbles kind of, you know, not jangling around anymore.
great. Speaking of dogs, I mean, this is a great segue. Ghost, the White Shepherd, is such a vivid presence. So, what draws you to writing human animal partnerships? I think you've kind of already told us because we know you love dogs, but tell us more about that.
Well, there are two dogs that Ghost is based on, and actually, Ghost was introduced in the Joe Ledger book series, but in book 3, King of Plagues. I had wanted to give him a companion that had a kind of a more simple emotional, you know, structure. And dogs are like, you know, they're uncomplicated love. You know, they're wonderful, but they can be trained also. So they're good partners. They're good friends. They're empathic. So I decided to have a contest. So I asked my, you know, followers on social media to pick a dog that was, you know, I need the breed and the name. And I hired 2. We started getting so many of these of the suggestions in, thousands and thousands of them. So I asked a couple of friends of mine who were retired canine cops if they would pick separately, and they both picked White Shepherd because there was something about it that seems, you know, has the stability and intelligence and trainability of the Shepherd, but the White Shepherds also have a more complex personality than a lot of German Shepherds do. And I wanted that as well. And it's also a dog that's not supposed to be trainable for combat. But I've met a few military guys who had White Shepherds, and they said, if you train it right, if the dog respects you, it'll do anything for you. So I gave Joe the dog. And it's funny because both cops came up with the same dog and the same name because there were a whole bunch of White Shepherds. I don't know why, particularly White Shepherds, but people kept suggesting that. But his personality is based on 2 of my dogs. My very first dog, and even have a photo, I have very few photos of me as a kid, but I have a photo of my grandmother handing me a puppy. It was not a Shepherd though. It was its mother was a Doberman and its father was a American Mastiff. So it was you know, you would think it's a giant, but it was the runt of its litter. And she gave it to me, and it was born on Halloween. She called it Spooker because, you know, it's Halloween. And for about 6 months, it was tiny and then hit a growth spurt. So by the time it was 13, 14 months old, Spooker was about 215 pounds and all muscle. And weirdly, for a big dog, he lived for 16 years, which big dogs generally don't.
Oh, yeah.
And instead, and we didn't have to put him down or anything. He just, on his last day, he just walked away. And he walked out the porch. We never found him again. And I was told that some dogs do not want to die in the presence of their pack. They just want to die alone. So we looked everywhere, but that dog, he had so much personality. He'd be the kind of dog where he'd knock over your beer, but he would help you clean it up. And I had a Shepherd who had a weird trick where no matter what you gave him, he would take it apart and eat each little piece separately. And so Ghost, if you give him like a Big Mac, he'll eat each part separately. And it's a little personality quirk of certain dogs. Mm-hmm. So every quality that Ghost has comes from other dogs I've actually known or had. And that makes it fun for me because I can remember, like, I can read any scene where there's Ghost and I can tell you which thing is traced back to Spooker, which is traced back to another dog or another dog. And that makes me feel like the dogs are still alive and still with me. I mean, Joe has another pet. He has a cat named Cobbler. I had that cat for 21 years.
And when he passed, I gave him to Joe so that the cat would always be alive.
We could keep talking about dogs, but I know
talk about dogs. I just lost my baby this last summer.
Oh no, I'm so
14.
sorry. Oh.
And first dog I ever had, and I'm now kind of getting into that. Maybe I'm ready for another one.
Yeah. Well, my philosophy is the truest proof that the world is not balanced is the fact that dogs only live a few years.
Yeah.
Because they should live a long time. But anyway, getting back to hardcover, because I could talk about dogs all day long too. I love it.
Yes, for sure. Hey, so I actually have the next question, which is, you write convincingly across all sorts of genres, from horror to thrillers to science fiction. So can you tell us a little bit more, and you kind of have touched on this, but what really excited you about bringing your style of high intensity storytelling to a wilderness survival narrative such as this one?
Well, I've spent a lot of time, in my younger years, I did a lot of traveling across country, often on foot, or sometimes in a car with no plan, no map, nothing. And if I found an area, I would follow the smallest blue lines on the map. I didn't want to find people. I wanted to find nature. So I've spent a lot of time in wilderness areas. Like I said, I've been in the Bob Marshall Wilderness. I've been all through the Pacific Northwest and a lot of other places. And sometimes it is great to go there alone, because when you're with people, they kind of shelter you from things you might otherwise meet head on. And I wanted to meet nature. I wanted to hear it. I wanted to be alone in it. I wanted to find out who I was in nature, because I'm a city boy. I grew up in Philadelphia, where we didn't see anything green and growing but mold. I mean, and now I live in San Diego, where I look out, I've got a mountain right outside me, and I got the beach half a mile away. So I love nature, but I had to go find it when I was younger. And I remember one time I was in the Bob Marshall, in the Bob, as they call it, on a horse. And I just had one of those moments where the horse and I just stopped and listened to the woods. We must have stood there for a good half an hour just listening to the woods. You think there's no sound at first, and then slowly the forest begins speaking to you. And also, when I was a younger man, when I was a teenager, every summer I would spend in the Jersey Pine Barrens. And that is almost a quarter of the entire state of New Jersey is the Pine Barrens. A lot of people don't realize that all that, it's called the Garden State for a reason. It's all foliage. And it's where the Jersey Devil legend is from, which is the next book I'm writing, in fact, about that. And it's also places where you can get lost within a few feet of a road. And there's something magical, truly magical, about the feeling that you can step out of your world and be absent from it entirely. People can't find you. They have no idea where you are, and you're in another world. And being in a wilderness area, first off, the silence is great, as I mentioned, but also the fact that there is so much you don't know, and you can, and you try to learn by observation, by looking, by hearing, by feeling, without forcing it to be comfortable for you. It is what it is. So you have to learn to be comfortable with it. And that's an ego thing. You want to be able to dismantle your ego so that you can be humble in nature. And so I've spent a lot of time out in the wilderness and in deserts, Death Valley, and all sorts of places, just learning to be alive and be aware and be grateful to be in a place as big and beautiful as this. And as I grew into being a storyteller, I would go there and I would see evidence is maybe an old campfire or footsteps on a trail. And I'd wonder what that story was. Why did these people come there? What did they see? What did they learn? So, putting Joe Ledger in that place, I wanted to have him in a place where he could be apart from everything. But then, of course, things intrude on that because, as writers, our job is not to tell a story about a bunch of nice people having a great week. That is not fiction. We're in there to mess things up. But I wanted to start with the Bob. That wilderness is so incredibly, achingly beautiful and vast. So the wilderness always calls to me. It's pulled me out of the city anyway, and I love going hiking in the woods and hills and everything else. There's something, if you pause to listen to nature, it will tell you stories. Part of it starts with my approach to writing any kind of a story. I don't start with the big topic. I don't start with the big stuff. I start with, I pick some sort of a theme, and then I say, who will that impact? So I immediately go to character. Who will it impact? How will it impact that character? Everything to me has to be about characters, or it's not worth writing. So if I'm doing something that's action oriented and I know there's going to be a fight scene, you look around and you say, okay, well, how does that fight play out here? Now, my background in this, I've retired now, but I was in jiu-jitsu for 62 years. I taught martial arts history at Temple University. I was the expert witness for the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office for murder cases that involved martial arts. I did also a lot of that for private sector for, bad things, civil cases involving martial arts. And I was a bodyguard for years. And so I've not only had extensive training, I've also had extensive combat experience, not in the military, but 5 years as a bodyguard, 5 years as a bouncer, fighting, like in the bouncing job I was at, we were fighting 3 or 4 times every week for 5 years. As a bodyguard, you have long stretches where nothing happens, but when it does happen, you have a really tense 3 or 4 seconds and it's bad. I have been chopped in the shoulder with a meat cleaver, stabbed in the stomach with ice picks, hit by cars, shot at, and everything else. And I know what a real fight is like, and I know what it's not like. So when I'm choreographing, it's funny because it's 22nd of this month, I'm teaching a charity fundraiser workshop on choreographing action scenes. So it's a good question, good time for the question. But when you're choreographing a scene, it isn't just somebody attacks you, you beat them up or shoot them, and that's the end of it. It's how they attack based on the environment. You've got to project yourself into a place. And then you say, what are the advantages for the bad guys? What are the advantages for the good guys? And what are the disadvantages? How will that change as characters get tired? How will it change in elevation? How will it change with visibility changes, like an open field as opposed to a forest path? All of those things you have to be aware of so that you can then see the character there and see the antagonist there and find ways to put them in conflict and then find ways to play out that conflict. Sometimes it's a gun battle. Sometimes it's hand-to-hand combat. Sometimes it's Joe sicking his dog on someone. But all of it, each moment of action is going to be a little different because you don't want rinse and repeat. And you also want to entertain yourself as you're writing. You want to, it's kind of like way back when my son got into paintball and invited me to play paintball with him and his friends. It's not a great idea when somebody has actually been doing a lot of martial arts and understands stealth and also has carried a firearm. But it was fun because these are really smart kids. And I gave them clues so they could try to find me, so that they could problem solve their way to finding me rather than just shooting them and ending it all. I wanted them to learn how to do it. And it was interesting to see those that had some natural understanding of combat, of situational threat, and those who are learning on the fly, but they're paying attention to the moment. And, I love teaching it. I love putting characters in it. With Joe Ledger, because his level of combat competence and combat experience is very high, his confidence level plays into it. If I were to write the same story with a forest ranger, kind of like the Joe Blake novels by C.J. Box, that would be a different kind of story because that's a person who is not as deeply trained. If I was doing it with a camper who suddenly sees bad things happening and he wants to do something about it, again, a completely different story. But since I wanted this to be a Joe Ledger story, his level of awareness and competence helps structure his response, even though he is badly outnumbered. And that's the fun of choreographing this, because you can't just put him in a fight scene with all these guys and expect one person to win because they're all skilled, shooters too. So he has to play the game and isolate as much as possible in order to respond effectively, and do that all within a short story. See, in a book, I can stretch it out for several chapters. In a short story, you got to get it done. You got to give each moment its time to shine, but at the same time, you can't drag it out. So it has that faster pace, which makes a short story a lot more readable than if there's only one moment of action in the whole thing. I kind of like putting a few nice moments of action in there. And also, everything Joe does is actually possible. And every fight scene that he's in this story and others draw on my own experiences. So like I said, I do know what does and does not work. It always cracks me up when you see a movie where the hero has some martial arts and he's using jumping and spinning kicks against a real attacker. it's like, I said, might as well just shoot yourself because you were definitely going to lose that fight with all that theatrics. Real martial artists believe in that. In martial arts, we have a saying, fancy is fatal, simple is safe. That's kind of Joe's philosophy in combat too. He's not trying to impress anyone. He's trying to win.
That's awesome that everything can be done. There's an old movie, I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's called How to Murder Your Wife.
Oh yeah.
And he's a writer, and he plans out each of his action scenes. If he can't do it, then his character is not able to do it. So I love that.
And that is fun. In fact, I mentioned earlier that I'll be doing a Jersey Devil novel next. The main character of that is someone who's only had dojo training in martial arts, never real world training. So I'm going to actually be writing about what happens when somebody who has a black belt gets in a real fight. It's usually a very unpleasant moment of reality hitting you very hard. And then you have to, learn from that, adapt and grow, and become the protagonist of your story as it unfolds. And that's a lot of fun to do.
Well, while we're still talking about Joe Ledger, let's talk about your new release. And you showed us the book. The cover looked amazing.
Yeah. Red Empire, covered by Rob Grom, who does all my covers for Macmillan. This is the 15th book in the overall series, the Joe Ledger series, the 5th in the Rogue Team International. The first 10 books in the series, he worked for one group called Department of Military Sciences. That got shuttered, and then they became an international troubleshooting group called Rogue Team International. This book not only has Joe pitted against terrorists who are deploying a weaponized version of Yersinia pestis, Black Plague, in London, one that has a very fast infection rate to the point where the symptoms present really quickly, and also tetracycline and other antibiotics don't work on it. So, I have a scientist, Ronald Coleman, who's a real scientist, and now he's actually ongoing character in the book, who is my advisor. Where I tell him, I want to be able to do this. Is this ridiculous and impossible? It's like, oh no, here's how. And they'll tell me exactly how to do it. Luckily, we take pertinent details out of that sort of stuff. But the fun thing about Joe Ledger is the director of John Wick, Chad Stahelski, has been a fan of this series from the beginning. And he optioned for TV, and we are in development for a streaming service. I can't go into too many details right now. We're on a slight hold because he's actually in London filming Highlander with Henry Cavill. That's his latest film. And then when that is this principal photography and that's wrapped, we're going to get back to work on this. But we have a lot of fun, and he's a martial artist. So his stunt team actually does a lot of just for fun, does a lot of the Joe Ledger fight scenes because they're realistic fight scenes. And we got to figure out a way to make them entertaining on the screen, because a real fight scene is over in 2 seconds. There's no lingering battle. It's attack, defense, done. It's not like two guys throwing punches at each other in a bar. In a bodyguard fight scene or a spec ops combat fight scene, you're talking about somebody who actually is an expert in winning the fight, not in being fancy, not in looking pretty, the expert in winning the fight. And that means that they don't want to make it go long. So you have to wrap it really quickly. And that's its own specialty. And Joe is really good at that. And it's funny because I do workshops sometimes for spec ops guys at a certain type of hand-to-hand combat thing. And it's funny how many of them actually have read the Joe Ledger books and appreciate them for their accuracy in combat. And I've never served in the military. I've just been martial arts my whole life. But anyway, so there's that.
I was so excited that they're making another Highlander. I grew up on Highlander.
Henry Cavill, Dave Bautista, Colin Farrell, Karen Gillian. It's a great cast. It's amazing. Jeremy Irons. It's a fantastic cast.
Oh my gosh, I can't even wait.
Yeah, and but I did have a show on Netflix. It was called V Wars, and it was based on my books and comics. And it only lasted one season because it was a plague show that launched right at the beginning of COVID. Our timing couldn't have been worse. So Netflix canceled us on that. But that was a fun show to do. And I had another thing that made it to the screen. If you guys ever watch any of the Marvel movies, Black Panther Wakanda Forever is based, about 40% of it is based on my run of the comic from 2009. I was the first one to put Shuri in the armor, put up against Namor, did all that stuff in 2009. And I was over the moon when Marvel told me, that they want me to come to the premiere because my stuff is in the movie. So my son and I went, and we haven't recovered yet.
Well, I want to switch a little bit to about Joe's resilience. You use that as a major theme in a lot of your works, and whether it's physical, moral, or psychological. So what aspects of resilience were you most interested in Joe exploring in this set?
In this story, it's the resilience that he's facing is the fact that no matter where he goes, trouble seems to follow him. He can't seem to escape it. He can't even go into a wilderness on a horse where nobody should be there, and suddenly he has this going on, and that's kind of Joe. He's a magnet for it. In the New Age community, they talk about attracting things in, and Joe doesn't want to attract things in, but it seems to happen a lot to him. It's funny, they make a joke about that in the Reacher novels too. The fact that no matter where he goes, trouble's there. And Joe is like that. But at the same time, he's not a gung-ho guy in that he's not one of those kill them all, let God shoot him out. He's not a gun porn guy. His weapons are tools, for problem solving. And it's his damage though. His real damage is emotional. When he was 14, his girlfriend were attacked. She was assaulted. He was beaten almost to death, and couldn't do anything about it. That's why he got involved in martial arts. He needed to then. He couldn't have saved her, so now he's trying to save everyone else. So we see that it's a borderline between desperation and hubris. He wants to be the good guy and is afraid that if he stops being the good guy, the next person might not be as good at getting between the good guys and the innocent. So he's kind of in a trap of his own skills. And in this book series, especially, 14 novels, 15 novels in, he's taken a lot of damage. And, I know from myself, all the damage I've taken. I've had 117 broken bones and 18 knife wounds of one kind or another. They talk about when you have a broken bone, you can tell when the weather's changing. I can tell when the weather's changing in the south of France. I mean, every part of me hurts all the time, but it's a pure example of it's not the years, it's the mileage. Joe is still in his middle 30s, and he's been through a lot. The emotional damage of his childhood, which propelled him in this direction, and all the fights he's been in. He has to learn how to take that, not be polluted by resentment, and not buy too much into his own ability, belief as a superpower. He's going to try to find that middle path where he can be a good, decent human being every time there's not a fight. But when a fight happens, he always try to control a fight, but there are times it's escalating out of your control. You have to rise to it. And when he rises to it, he becomes a different aspect of himself. It's not a pleasant one. And I even had one book where because a terrible thing happened to his family, he lost himself in a new emerging personality called the Darkness, where he was essentially a psychopath, but he was killing the bad guys like around the world, to the point where he was in danger of just losing himself. And it was a long fight to get back from that, back to a place of stability. And the Hard Country story, in my personal head, is set somewhere in that healing process of him trying to find peace again. And no matter where he goes, it's not there. It's there for a minute, but it gets stolen from him. So in my imaginary sequel to the story, he'll go back a week later, him and his dog and his horse, and just be alone. Maybe even not take his comms with him so nobody can find him. Nobody can tell there's a problem. That I would almost want to write that just so the Joe that lives in my head can go, hey, God, I have wanted to write stories where he and his best friend, Rudy Sanchez, who's also a psychiatrist and is formerly his therapist, where they just go fishing. And I've sat down and read it a few times, but I rarely have time to do self-indulgent writing. I write between 3 and 5 long novels every year. So like last year, I did 956,000 words for publication. It doesn't leave me a lot of time to write stuff that would just be fun, because I would also like to write a literary novel about a writer's colony, and I would like to do a couple of children's picture books about puppies. But, my agent says, yes, that's really wonderful. And maybe when you retire, I'm like, I'm close to 70. What do we from retire? But these, the books that I write are the ones that, drive my career, feed my family, and so on. So I don't know, maybe they'll bury me with a laptop and a good Wi-Fi, and I'll turn that story in from the great beyond. Yeah, it's pretty calm up here or down here.
Yeah. You won't find the peace then. I don't know. Maybe though.
Well,
Maybe.
actually, I kind of have. I don't do any of the violent stuff anymore. My whole life was martial arts of one kind or another. I'm retired now. My wife and I live in San Diego. We have a grandson. My wife's actually coming back from having spent the day. My son and his fiance and the baby live, 15 minutes away. I have a grandson now. And the worst injuries I get these days are a paper cut. That's it. And I'm enjoying the peace. I meditate every morning. I'm on the beach at sunset every single morning, meditate, and then I read poetry every single morning. That's how I start my day. I do some gratitudes, go over things I'm grateful for, and I go home and start writing. So I start my day off with peace, and I end my day with meditation before bed. So there is peace, even though what I write is dark and violent, it is not what defines me. It's the world is troubled, and some people are out there trying to stir it up, and some people are out there trying to calm it down.
That's really actually beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I love that. Well, I know our readers are very excited for the Joe Ledger story. So thank you again for taking some time to chat with us.
Oh, this was fun. You guys have good questions too.
Thank you for joining us. If you loved going beyond the margins with us today, subscribe and come back for more stories. Keep reading, keep writing, and we'll see you next time on West of the Page.